Should two consenting adults be allowed to duel each other without legal ramifications? Why or why not? That used to be a thing in Austria around 1900. It was eventually outlawed as the emperor realized that a whole generation of his best officers and soldiers were dueling each other to death for any perceived slight to their honor. Edit. A lot of replies are talking about fencing, cheek scars, and other duel traditions of German-speaking countries. While all of that is true, it was mostly pistol duels that ended up so deadly as to affect the demographics of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Which makes sense, I guess. Dueling with sabers, rapiers, and so on were quite common, but mostly only fought until first blood was drawn or one party conceded. It's not so easy to kill someone with a blade actually. Then fashion trended towards pistol duels. Death was a more common outcome, but flintlocks are slow and imprecise. Often both parties wouldn't hit on their first shot and had several minutes between reloads to consider whether they wanted to go through with this again. Then pistols evolved faster than our customs and a revolver duel would very easily be deadly for at least one party. George Washington had the same issue. In banning duels among his troops, he was going against a major part of being a man and maintaining honor in Southern and Mid-Atlantic culture. As I read more about Washington's troop management, his efforts to ban dueling tell me just how beloved he was. He essentially struck at the very concept of honor as his men perceived it. But his men loved him so much that not only did they try to stop dueling each other, but they started fighting duels over the duel ban itself. Someone would insult Washington's honor over the duel ban, and someone in support of Washington's duel ban would duel to defend the duel ban. But wait, Washington seems to say, this is the opposite fucking thing I wanted. The Lee-Lawrence duel is an interesting eyewitness account of the duel/honor/ban paradox. Probably my favorite duel of the era. While technically two adults should have the right to sign up to duel each other, a few issues potentially arise with the slippery slope that it presents. People will start holding vendettas and revenge duels become popular, where the child or spouse of a dueler wants justice or revenge and taints the moral vagueness of having consenting adults. What if the angry party stops at nothing and kills someone outside of a duel? The cycle of violence just spirals out of control. You also get the issue of how do you certify a duel was legal or who is in charge of being a third party to a duel? What if people cheat and hire their own legal aid to declare someone that was murdered to have signed a duel agreement? These are just examples, but you see what I mean. Simple and interesting concept, but I think it isn't sustainable. Most people like living. People who are willing to literally fall on their sword are few and far between, especially at the level of comfort we have now. The ones who are willing to participate in the duel want a fair fight because they want to win on their standards, and apparently duels are quite easy to create rules for. https://www.reddit.com/r/askhistorians/comments/for/w16kv/how_were_cheating_un/in/first comment down. Nothing is sustainable if people want to put their lives on the lines in battle. Let them. It's not like it isn't being done now anyway, illegally with gang deaths etc. You're just trying to look at it through only your perspective and then think of the limited logic and coming to the easiest conclusion. Humans are smart and the ones that came up with the rules far exceed your or my intelligence. It'll just fall out of favor again like it has in the past, but then we can all enjoy the duel, and if something is that important to someone, chances are you will think about why this person chose to die by their beliefs. Also, as Naran K said, it could be really good for our healthcare system. The type of people who are willing to die in a duel are going to be the ones who live life harder. Those people generally pay for it in the end with health problems which are a burden on all of us. So I say let them. If someone who was biologically born a male is allowed to call themselves a woman, why shouldn't a person be able to duel? Also, you got to think about the effects of the duel itself. You get in the ring with someone knowing that one of you is going to die, then you think, do I really know enough about this to die for it, and do I want to die, or do I really want to end another's life? So chances are most will be for show. Or instead of guns we can have fighting matches where people beat the shit out of each other, causing undue stress to the healthcare system as the repeated blows to the head causes brain trauma. In past times where duels were allowed, backing away from one also bought you an amount of ridicule and ostracization that meant participating wasn't really optional either. Mainstream society was honor-based, like prison life. This kind of mindset is most common in poor and uneducated people today, but in the past, upper-class men were expected to defend their reputation in the same way that gang members are today. There is a logical connection to history. The upper class is descended from militarily aristocracy knights. While it resonates deeply with human nature and ancient threads of our culture, this kind of aggressive honor-based system is stupid as fuck. We aren't in jail, we don't have to live like we are. Legalizing dueling would elevate primitive values which are best left in the past. Yes, you can, you don't have to have it on the spot. In fact, you shouldn't have it the same day, and you can get witnesses. Smarter humans have figured out very well in the past. That ridicule is deserving. You thought you knew so much that you go to the point of wanting to duel and then chicken out. That means you're a bully and were just trying to get your own way. It would be a great life lesson to them, and they may have to move in order to make a life for themselves, but whatever. On the case of feeling pressured to, if you're that goddamn stubborn, you deserve it, or they won't, because they admit they don't know as much or they don't care about as much as you. Also, there's going to be people who become laughing stocks because they want to duel over everything, which will eventually make them chill out and stop. The dueling it out in the ring is a bad idea too. Guns make you equal and it's more a battle of will. Fists can be one-sided, and if you allow duels, then someone bigger and stronger will only say want to duel and bully everyone into submission. Also, you gotta think of the health system. Someone dies, it barely shows a blip. You take thousands who will now want to legally live this way and get into duels, then they get traumatic brain injury and have to be cared for over a lifetime, worst case scenario, which will cause great stress to the system. There's no danger to bystanders. We're smart enough to know how to have a duel safely, but it's not your life. If someone can say they're a woman when they were born a biological male, why not allow someone who is willing to fall on their sword? People should feel free to be themselves no matter what. We shouldn't feel the need to control others' lives so much, but rather rules that all live by. Follow the rules, do what you want. No, if only for the fact that those two people aren't the only ones who will be affected by the outcome. Friends, family, dependents, neighbors, colleagues, all of them will suffer the consequences in one way or another, and society at large will pay the cost if the practice becomes widespread. A society where people want to murder each other as a means of settling disputes or attaining justice is a backwards honor-based society, one where petty pride and ego are treated like high virtues instead of the monkey brain stupidity they are. It's a step in the wrong direction, without question. Violence is a dangerous thing to condone, especially between individuals. It's not just a matter of one person doing physical damage to another's body, it's a sociological toxin. If you need proof of this, just look around the world at societies where interpersonal violence is the go-to means of attaining justice. Look at societies where honor is treated like a sacred virtue. I'm from Ireland, where tit-for-tat murder was the norm for decades. They killed one of ours, so we killed two of theirs. In the end, peaceful and political resolutions are the only ones that actually worked. Succumbing to those feelings of violent rage we all feel at some point is not the way to handle it. Not if you actually have a halfway noble goal in mind. It works that way for individuals and entire nations. Anti-violence isn't just something cowards or the libs promote. The loudest voices in this branch of sociology are those who've partook in violence and saw the effects, on themselves as well as their victims. An armed society is a polite society. It is a popular Heinlein quote, often repeated by people who are in favor of, well, an armed society. But far from being an endorsement of such things, it is a warning. The story it comes from, Beyond This Horizon, tells of a world where dueling is legal, and those who will duel walk about armed, ready to take offense at the slightest of grievances, and those who do not wish to duel wear signifiers of their unwillingness to do so, and are relegated to second-class citizenship. It is fiction, but illustrative. In societies which practiced dueling, a common refrain from duelists after the fact was that they dueled because they were cowards, and afraid to face the censure of society which expected them to do so, and that true courage was exercised by those who rejected a challenge despite the opprobrium that they knew it might bring upon them. The banishment of the duel from social discourse was an objective good, and it should certainly never be brought back. Assuming duels to the death, I think it's interesting because we already often sign waivers in which we acknowledge the very real risk of death when we do things such as rock climbing or skydiving. Though typically the risk of death with activities like that are much less than the odds of dying in a duel to the death, which is 50/50. But the real difficult part is for the person doing the killing. It would be hard to justify laying no charges on someone who murdered someone else in a duel, even if the other individual expressed their consent and acknowledgement of that possible outcome. Since a duel is a highly optional event to partake in, the government would never condone it, especially as opposed to seeking traditional legal action against those who've wronged you. Essentially, the government would have to decide whether or not murder is justified if the murdered party previously expressed explicit consent, or at least acknowledgement of the possibility, of being killed. In cases such as medically assisted suicide, this is accepted, but that's a lot different than willingly putting your life on the line to fight for your honor. In conclusion, LOL, no, I think that would be a terrible idea. Of course, all this is assuming that the duels are to the death. Although nothing is done in a vacuum, whatever Bobby Sue and Johnny Yoo do is also strictly none of our business. Although it's morally fucked, objectively death and injury are not a bad thing. It may remove values and laborers, but it also cuts down on resource consumption, which helps with our overpopulation problem. People would argue that it needlessly uses resources from hospitals and the like, but for any country that treats healthcare like a business, looking at the US, it also generates revenue. Especially morgues and the coffin industry, dead bodies are useful for all sorts of things, from medical science to compost. As long as the living person is consenting, it also becomes a renewable resource. As long as people are being born more frequently than they die, which thanks to medical science there's a pretty large amount of wiggle room here, then death is near strictly a good thing for the economy. I will agree that it's unfair to the loved ones of the combatants. But I believe there's room to regulate the conditions of a duel so that in order to consent to one the combatants would need to tie up loose ends. And by that I mean see to their prior obligations. As an example, dueling could not be used as a resolution if one of the combatants has to say, pay child support. They would have to see to it that that child is sufficiently taken care of first. Otherwise, so long as they aren't indebted or otherwise obligated not to duel, it becomes the classic debate over personal rights and consent. It's literally the current my body my choice argument for abortion discussions. Even if it's unfair, it's still a personal choice. Considering rights, there's only one right that all things are born with, and that's choosing how they want to die. Which brings into the discussion of suicide and assisted suicide. Historically it's been outlawed for religious reasons, but globally it's still an ongoing debate and assisted suicide is even often considered the morally correct action. Imagine pulling the life support off of a terminal patient. Many countries consider this a form of assisted suicide. This is all OFC to say that the duel is to the death, which many simply were not. But as mutual combat is already a thing in quite a number of places, I won't touch on that. People would argue that it needlessly uses resources from hospitals and the like, but for any country that treats healthcare like a business, looking at the US, it also generates revenue. Especially morgues and the coffin industry. Death is near strictly a good thing for the economy. https://n.m.wiki/parable_of_the_broken_window. This is well known to not be true, and is why all property damage from natural disasters are described by their cost to society. It's literally the current my body my choice argument for abortion discussions. Even if it's unfair, it's still a personal choice. This is not accurate. As discussed by Scottus in Roe v. Wade itself, the mother's rights are not absolute. The trimester theory is incomplete and the court never once put an actual time frame on it. The public view of 3-3-3 months isn't in the opinion, but is effectively a balancing test of the mother's rights against the state's interest in a person being born. The fetus's purported rights are not discussed, and IIRC, the court in other cases, has declared they're not going to decide when life starts, as that is a political question. In at least one early period of time, the mother's rights clearly outweigh the state's interest, and abortion cannot be prohibited. Near the end of the pregnancy, the state's interest clearly outweigh the mother's rights, and the state can categorically forbid abortion. In between is a gray area where the courts need to scrutinize the strength of the state's interest. Dr. Even renowned legal scholars, and related, basically all philosophers, agree that there is no such thing as human rights in a vacuum, or if there are, they are incredibly limited, like the right to have your own thoughts. All rights can be regulated by social groups, because no rights would exist without social groups. This does not require subscribing to social contract theory, but refers specifically to without others who could infringe them. How can a right exist? Consider your right to not be furbulayed. We have no concept for furbulaying, so any natural right which could implicate it is meaningless. Note that even the right to not be killed is not endless. Consider self-defense. While the right to not be killed is not absolute, it would seem to widely outstrip any arguments for a right to kill or harm others. At this point, we are now balancing your rights to form contracts and to act of your own volition and consent against other people's rights to not be subjected to emotional trauma, not waste resources, not live in fear of a dueling honor-based hierarchy, etc. Both of those former rights are already plenty restricted, e.g. no contracts in violation of public policy, no voluntary crimes, etc., and all of the latter rights are protected at times, e.g., prohibitions against torture, torts for loss of consortium, property rights and eminent domain theory, equal protection, rule of law versus might makes right, etc. Therefore, there will be circumstances in which your claimed right to consensually duel is superseded by others' rights to you not doing that. In conclusion, no one has the right to do whatever they want. The concept of rights is meaningless unless restricted. Hypothetically, there could be sufficiently regulated dueling laws that let you do this without harming others, but isn't that, kind of, literally sports? Arguing that someone has the autonomy to do X, Y, or Z requires simultaneously arguing why others should not be allowed to prevent them from doing X, Y, or Z. This is why the abortion debate has narrowed primarily to the definition of when life begins, in that the anti-abortion perspective has no real, justifiable counter-argument to the general concept of trimesters and would be limited to arguing that the woman's right never supersedes the state's interest, which is a position with hilariously poor optics. Correspondingly, the only viable argument is that the fetus's own rights supersede hers at some early point. When do rights attach? When do gametes become a person? For the current discussion, the abortion debate itself is irrelevant. Considering rights, there's only one right that all things are born with, and that's choosing how they want to die. We disagree fundamentally on this, as above. No, for many reasons. Our healthcare system doesn't need the extra burden if they suffer injuries. Sure, they could be millionaires and pay for it themselves, but some people will complain about not having the right to duel if you're not a millionaire. This would almost certainly evolve into people fighting to the death for sport/money. Unless you have a dystopian mind, poor/homeless people fighting to the death for a shot at making it back in life isn't a positive thing. It'd be a pain to ensure it's all legit. They're both consenting, can pay for their injuries, are both mentally sane, no one is being pressured into doing it, etc. Being legal would encourage more people to do it. Even if you're of the opinion that it should be allowed, I think we can all agree that encouraging people to do it is not a good thing. If they really want to do it, they can just go deep in some random forest, and fight there. No one will stop them. There's no reason for them to want it to be legal other than getting medical assistance if they get wounded, or making sure they don't 5v1 him or things that like, but the government shouldn't have to ensure that. No, because it doesn't settle a dispute. It just makes it even more worse between the interested parties, and that extends beyond the people dueling. Let's say my dad has a dispute with someone. I'm likely to take his side unless it was because he'd done something really heinous. There are therefore two outcomes: he's either dead, and now I'm pissed at the person who killed him, or he's now shown he's willing to kill to make a point. Neither outcome is good. It's bad enough with modern sports in terms of the reaction from their fans when a team/player loses. Now imagine the losing team/player gets killed rather than just missing out on a trophy. It would be an ultra shit show.